Welcome to this week's Rentwars. This is a summer edition, so we're on a reduced schedule for the summer. The show still comes on every week, but some of the new shows will be coming at a slightly reduced rate for the summer because it's summer. But there's a lot going on, and we had to share with you that Rentwars actually won an award this year. We were honored for the BFree First Amendment Outstanding Program Feature or Segment. And the feature segment you may have seen was the Murder at Borough Hall segment that we did. It was very exciting to be honored for that. It was a very painful show to work on because it's so depressing, and it involved the Black Lives Matter movement, and it involved just the spate of killings where people walk away. Now, of course, it's been overwhelmed by current events where the end result of a conviction for Akai Gurley's killer was a slap on the wrist. What's worse is that, at the end of it, the DA himself goes, I don't recommend jail time. So the message to the police and the police unions was to say, what a waste of time. You shouldn't have prosecuted anyway if you didn't want to give jail time. And of course, that's not the message you want to send. And the problems with Ken Thompson basically waffling on this issue I sort of discussed in Murder at Borough Hall, came to a head in a very public fashion. So basically, everyone's mad at him. The message is, it doesn't matter. It's okay. You'll get away with killing Black and Latino people. Just knock yourself out. So it was very exciting to be honored for that particular show, and to know that people are actually really paying attention to some of the work put into writing and animating these shows. Also in the news is Preet Bharara taking down multiple top cop in the NYPD, so the brass, for corruption, basically turning the NYPD into a private police force, sort of as a satellite arm of the Shamran. And the New York Times, of course, did a beautiful job of pulling this out and talking about Fort Surrender in Brooklyn. Another issue I want to discuss today is the Brexit, Great Britain's exit from the European Union, and how that relates to Donald Trump. And last but not least, Airbnb, and how Airbnb is exacerbating the housing crisis and making it impossible for people to live at all in the city of New York. First, let's deal with the BFree Award that Rentwars has won. So we won one in 2014. We actually won two in 2014 in two different categories. And now we've been honored with the First Amendment Award in 2016, which is very exciting. So what is this award and who's giving it? Well, in 2014, I believe they won 2 or 3 Emmys. This year, 2016, they have been nominated for 13 Emmys, including 3 by producers who work at the same level as I do. So it's very exciting, and they're trying to get us to up our game so that we can compete for even more Emmys. So these guys have their 13 Emmy nominations, and they are going around encouraging us and inspiring us by giving these awards that recognize some of our hard work and, the unique points of view that corporate TV just will not give you, and that the chatterbox of the internet just doesn't have. Interestingly enough, doesn't produce the same sort of analysis that we can do. So this year we have won. We've been honored with an award for the Murder at Borough Hall segment. Of course, just bringing attention to the fact that someone was gunned down on camera, a blatant murder. I mean, it's unreal. Directly at one of the busiest train stations in New York City, on camera. You can see just the lies and the way this retired correction officer basically stalked his victim and punched him in the face, and when the victim raised his hands to defend himself, shot him. And we went over the statutes, and this is something that, at Rentwars, we do have access to legal knowledge, and not just, here's a law, but the case law that surrounds it, something deeper than just pointing at a statute. So it really feels good to be honored for that particular feature segment, because it was very hard to produce and it was painful in the context of what else is going on around the country. I appreciate everyone over at Brick who voted to honor Rentwars for the Murder at Borough Hall episode. And I also have to thank you viewers, because they do pay attention to the viewers as well, and the analysis and what's going on when these shows air. So it's a great honor to receive this award, and to know that, hey, this wasn't just a one-time thing. So 2014 and now 2016 and beyond, we're going to see what goes on now that people are walking around with all these Emmys. Maybe we can see if we can compete for one. The real importance of the award on another level is just these are media professionals honoring people who are producing shows, and it's quite inspiring to have media professionals look at what you're doing and say, keep up the good work. So they've definitely inspired me to improve my game. I'm working on making the show even better, doing all of that, and it's a great feeling. Now, moving on to the Rent Guidelines Board. The Rent Guidelines Board has done it again. So that's Mayor de Blasio has, for a second year in a row, delivered on his campaign promise to seek 0% increases. We have gone for 2 decades with non-stop increases and higher increases, 1.7% to 15%, ridiculously high increases to, once again, 0%. Bravo, Mayor de Blasio, on that. I mean, whatever other problems you're having, one thing I think everyone has to say is he has definitely done a lot with respect to the Rent Guidelines Board, and putting this back into reality. Fuel prices went down, and yet the landlords scream about they want more increases. Well, all their expenses have gone down. The rent should be going negative. but that might be harder to do. One thing we can say is a 0% increase is helping those New Yorkers who are fortunate enough to be in rent stabilized housing. And it's an excellent thing that Mayor de Blasio has kept his promise with respect to that. Now, if we could get him to quit ringing the dinner bell. What I mean by that is it's nice to say we're going to help people who are poor and struggling and working class. It's not nice when you say we don't have money to help the poor, the struggling, and the working class, but we're going to ring the bell and attract people from all over the country to come, and we're going to take care of them, but we can't take care of the people who've been here struggling under New York's vicious economy and vicious housing circumstances. So, but just to keep it positive, it is a really good thing that at least he has maintained a rent guidelines board that is giving 0% increases, which is excellent. Talking about the housing issue, the New York Times recently had an article about how Airbnb may be exacerbating the housing crisis. So what do I mean by exacerbating? Well, Airbnb shows little people going, oh, I just want a few extra bucks living in my house. Well, it used to be not so long ago that when someone wanted a few extra bucks to share an apartment or share a room with someone, that they would rent it out and that person would help pay towards the rental of the rent stabilized apartment or the unregulated apartment, whatever it is, as a roommate. So you would put an ad on Craigslist listing for a roommate. You would interview several people. People would come, go, this place is dump. You might reject the person because they extremely slovenly or whatever, or they plan to be slovenly, whatever. But the amount of money you would make towards your rent, maybe it would be half of the rent. Maybe it would be a little more than that, 3/4 of the rent. With Airbnb, now you're running private hotels. So you're not actually running a hotel, but you're having people from all over the globe compete for the space. And since hotel rooms cost $400, $500, $600 a night, you're going to give some tourists from Europe a lower price for the evening, $300 or maybe $200. But however many hundred it is, it's always going to be more than what a regular person would be able to pay, a regular roommate. Perhaps a regular roommate would pay half the rent. So if the rent is $2,000, you pay $1,000. If the rent is $3,000, you pay $1,500. And people would be able to split that. But why? When in less than a week, you can have $1,400. But Airbnb is even worse than that, because while they show you these little old people making ends meet and blah, 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 what they don't show you is that a substantial portion of the Airbnb stock, meaning housing that's available, is actually run for profit by people who are absentee. I actually had one who would leave keys for people to pick up to rent a supposed residential space down the block from where I was, and there's just a never-ending stream of suitcases. The New York Times calls it Suitcase Alley. Or maybe, well, they're saying maybe someone else calls it Suitcase Alley, but that's how they're listing it in the New York Times. And it's unreal because there's no place to live. The rents are too damn high. And Airbnb is making it so that people who are trying to live and work in New York City cannot live and work in New York City because people are able to run illegal hotels. And while it may be nice to talk about how it helps a particular individual to make a few extra bucks, but they're profiteering, aren't they, really? What it really comes down to is that they are causing the housing crisis to be worse than it already is, which is saying quite a bit. It is a nightmare. However, there may be other factors coming into play because the Europeans and people from Asia and all the people who are basically coming in and just riding around, making New York completely unlivable, with the tourist industry, getting some money from that. It may be that those days are over anyway, because according to some sources, and there was a dip right after the Brexit, but according to some sources, the good times for Europe are over. Europe is facing a financial meltdown, which was started long before the Brexit vote. Basically, the handwriting was on the wall with the Greek bailouts and outrage in Greece over European Union austerity provisions being pressed on them because they didn't follow the German method of doing things. Now, Great Britain, one of the major pillars of the European Union, although not currency-wise because they kept their pound separate, is saying, you guys have lost your minds. And the European Union has just ignored all concerns about border security, and it has become a shooting gallery, which far-right elements are saying, hey, we've got to do something. And they're right, because by doing nothing, people who are of a more liberal bent are actually making it impossible to see sort of common ground to provide protection and not to overdo open borders. And as a result, open borders have lost credibility. And because they've lost credibility, people are afraid. And when people are afraid, the right wing benefits. When you sit there and say, don't pay attention to the fire, we'll be okay, and there's a flame going on, and rather than grabbing a fire extinguisher and putting it out, you're sticking your head in the mud like an ostrich and saying just ignore it. This is what the Brexit is really about. And all these people going, oh, the British are going to learn. Believe me, while there are globalization forces that are upset, the British themselves will probably be very pleased to start having control over jobs and who can come and take those jobs, and start giving Britons work. Now, here in the U.S., we are suffering from globalization as well. It's slightly different, and none other than Donald Trump has dug into it. The Brexit has domino effect, but Donald Trump, prior to the Brexit, was already feeding into this anger at these free trade agreements. These free trade agreements are destroying everybody except the upper 0.01%. They are completely economically destroying the country. Now, hopefully, Hillary Clinton is, of course, in my opinion, better presidential material. But hopefully, one thing she gets from Donald Trump's candidacy is that you really have to look at these free trade agreements and some of this wacky immigration policy where you allow these giant companies to hire foreign people to put Americans out of work here in America. Specifically, bring them over here, give them H-1 visas, and fire all the Americans. And then you wonder why people are upset. It's bizarre, absolutely bizarre. So while Donald Trump may be quite a character, he has a point, and the Brexit people have a point. You've got to, I hope Hillary Clinton steps back, says, hey, wait a minute, we've got to do something to protect the middle class, the working class, the poor, and actually even the professional classes are at risk now. Lawyers can't get jobs now. So remember that this globalization thing is an unholy marriage of liberals and conservatives. Of course, they're the far right ultranationalists. Those are some scary folk. But just because some scary folk like one thing doesn't mean that you should ignore the one thing. We are in a situation where all of our jobs are being outsourced to other countries. And those jobs that can't be outsourced, like jobs that you physically have to drive a car, you have to be a hotel doorman, or you fix air conditioners in place, those are being outsourced because we allow them to bring aliens either legally with H-1 visas or illegally by overstays or illegal immigration to take those jobs. It's extreme, the situation. Something has to be done. The people who are benefiting are these extremely rich, big major corporations. Something has to be done. Now, I had promised to talk about the 3 top cops. That's going to have to wait for another show because I'm out of time. And thank you for watching this week's episode of Rentwars. Hopefully we'll all have jobs. Oh, and I forgot. And what isn't outsourced, what isn't stolen from sending it overseas or by giving it to foreign nationals, well, automation's taking away the rest of the jobs. So people who used to be needed to file things, and all these jobs are being eaten up by automation. And as we're talking, they're planning to even take away the driving jobs. Why? They want to automate all the driving and theoretically to make it safer, but they've had a bunch of crashes where it's not safe. So in any case, thank you again for watching Rentwars, and we'll see you next week. So, the question comes up, and I've been asked, what do I mean by corrupt? I just don't like what they do. No. What is corruption? Corruption is not just when you're dissatisfied with a judge's ruling. As a matter of fact, sometimes you're dissatisfied with the ruling. You don't like it, you wish it went the other way, but sometimes you're very satisfied with the judging of that ruling, how the judge went about following the ruling, finding the ruling. Corruption is a cheating of the rules. What rules? Well, the problem with law is that a lot of people don't know the rules, and a lot of stuff is done behind the scenes and underground and in the dark. Basically, let's pretend we were playing a game of chess. The game of chess has certain rules. You see how the board is set up. You see how the pieces move. You can tell when the judge is cheating when the judge allows one player to, say, for instance, move a bishop as if it were a rook, or use the knight to jump 5 or 6 spaces instead of its normal L shape. We have other games and other things like Pokemon, Dungeons and Dragons, Magic the Gathering. All of those are rules, and they're actually systems of rules that are more complicated than law. What we mean by corruption is when someone isn't following the rules. And these rules are laid down specifically so that we can tell whether or not the rules are being followed and whether or not things are being handled properly and fair. Now, one of the problems with law is that people who complain about the rules and calling corruption usually don't know what they're talking about. So before you can really criticize corruption and identify it, a lot of times you have to understand what the rules are. And they're not that complicated, but it does take a little bit of effort to learn what they are, and also to appreciate law as a bigger pattern of importance. Well, I like to call it the beauty of law, which, in Rentwars we talk about the Amish concept of the beauty of law. So what that means is sort of the appreciation of choreography, opera, except on a giant societal scale. When you appreciate the total beauty of the system, you can see the failures taking place. So that's what I mean by corruption. I'm not just talking about I dislike a particular decision. I'm talking about disliking the failure to follow the rules, clearly understood, clearly laid out rules. In real life, a referee that did something like that would be ripped limb from limb. And, it's happened in other countries. We do not allow our sports officials to violate the rule and spirit of the rules as much as we allow our court officials to, which is bizarre. Why do we allow judges, people's lives are on the line, their freedom's on the line, their fortunes, their property. We allow these guys and women to scam and violate people's rights in real life that we would never tolerate at all in sports. This blatant corruption and bias that's openly exhibited by our federal courts and our state courts to a lesser degree would never be tolerated. Never be tolerated.